So, you think you'd make a great philosopher in ancient Greece, huh? Picture this, strolling through the streets of Athens, debating the meaning of life, surrounded by students hanging on your every word. Yeah, no? Forget it. Today, I'm going to show you why you wouldn't last a single day as a philosopher in ancient Greece. From birth, when survival was already a major accomplishment, to the not-so-glamorous routine of spending hours arguing about virtue while trying not to die of dysentery. So, get comfortable, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. So you've just been born in ancient Greece, somewhere around 470 BCE. Congratulations! You've already accomplished something remarkable, surviving childbirth. About 25% of your infant peers won't make it past their first year. Your mother just went through labor without epidurals, modern medicine, or even basic hygiene standards. If you think modern hospital waiting rooms are bad, imagine giving birth on a dirt floor while a priestess of Artemis chants incantations and your female relatives offer extremely questionable advice based on superstition. Let's take a moment to address your living situation. You're in a stone house with no glass windows, no air conditioning, and definitely no Netflix. Your crib? A woven basket, if you're lucky. More likely, you're swaddled tightly like a little Greek burrito and placed on a shelf somewhere. Don't roll over. Ancient Greek baby-proofing consisted primarily of try not to drop the baby and keep it away from the hearth fire. Your toys are pottery rattles filled with pebbles and carved wooden animals that would absolutely fail every modern safety standard due to choking hazards and lead paint. Hope you weren't born with any visible birth defects. If you were, there's a decent chance your parents might just leave you on a hillside for the elements, or wild animals, to take care of. This lovely practice called exposure was considered perfectly acceptable, especially in Sparta. Even in more civilized Athens, a deformed child was seen as a bad omen, possibly the result of divine displeasure. Just imagine the conversation. Honey, the baby has a clubfoot. Should we raise it or leave it on Mount Taygetus? Well, the neighbors already judge our home decor, so, assuming you've made it past the initial inspection, it's time for your naming ceremony. On the 10th day after birth, you'll be carried around the family hearth during the amphidromia ritual, officially welcoming you into the household. Your father will decide whether to accept you into the family. Spoiler, this won't end well if you're a girl in a family that already has several daughters. Female infanticide wasn't uncommon, as girls were considered economic burdens. You think gender reveal parties today are problematic? Try ancient Greece, where revealing it's a girl could be a death sentence. If you're a boy, congratulations on your male privilege. You've just won the ancient Greek lottery. Your education awaits, and people might actually remember your name. If you're a girl, well, hope you enjoy weaving and child-rearing, because that's pretty much your entire future unless you become a priestess or a high-class courtesan. Either way, your childhood will be brief. The concept of childhood, as we understand it, didn't really exist in ancient Greece. You're essentially a tiny, useless adult who needs to hurry up and become useful. Your diet as an infant consists primarily of breast milk, either from your mother or a wet nurse if your family is wealthy. Once you're weaned, you'll enjoy a nutritious diet of porridge, olive oil, wine, yes, wine, and occasionally some fish or meat if your family can afford it. Children's menus didn't exist. There was no kids eat free at the local taverna. You ate what adults ate, just in smaller portions, including watered-down wine. Your modern pediatrician would have an absolute meltdown about your ancient Greek diet. Toilet training? More like go in that pot or outside training. Indoor plumbing is millennia away. Your waste management consists of chamber pots emptied into the street or a nearby stream. Sewage systems in ancient Greece were primitive at best, non-existent at worst. Public health was not a priority, which explains why plague was a recurring special guest in Greek society. Just imagine the smell of an ancient Greek city during summer. Now imagine being potty trained in that environment. Charming, isn't it? Your early entertainment consists of stories about gods who commit incest, murder, rape, and transform people into various plants and animals for minor offenses. These tales aren't sanitized for your protection. You're getting the full mythological experience. These are your bedtime stories, your moral guidance, your spiritual foundation. Zeus turned into a swan to seduce a woman? Normal Tuesday. Cronus ate his children? Classic family drama. You'd need centuries of therapy if you grew up in modern times with these stories. But in ancient Greece, they're just the accepted explanation for why the sun rises and why earthquakes happen. If you make it to age 7, which isn't guaranteed given the childhood mortality rates, your formal education might begin if you're a boy from a good family. If you're a girl or a poor boy, congratulations on reaching the age where you can start contributing to the household economy. Your tiny hands are perfect for detailed work. Child labor laws are still about 2,400 years in the future. Your childhood injuries will be treated with a combination of herbal remedies that might actually work and religious rituals that definitely won't. Broken arm? Here's some willow bark tea and a sacrifice to Asclepius. As you approach your teens, you'll start preparing for your adult role. Boys from wealthy families might be paired with an older male mentor for educational purposes. This relationship, known as pederasty, was considered an important part of aristocratic education. Your modern sensibilities are probably screaming right now, but in ancient Greece, this was standard practice. The mentor would teach the boy poetry, politics, warfare, and other manly pursuits. If you're thinking this sounds inappropriate, congratulations on having 21st century ethics. You definitely wouldn't survive ancient Greek social norms. By the way, your chance of dying before adulthood hovers around 50%. Disease, accidents, warfare, and malnutrition claim many young lives. Those who survive childhood in ancient Greece don't do so because of superior healthcare or safety measures. They're just lucky. If you've made it to puberty, you've already outlived countless others. You haven't had a single vaccination, your teeth are probably already rotting, and you've likely had several parasitic infections. But hey, at least you don't have to worry about screen time limits or social media addiction. Instead, you get to worry about dying from diarrhea or being sacrificed to appease an angry god during times of crisis. Choose your childhood struggles, right? Welcome to Greek education, where the term school is derived from skol, meaning leisure, which is ironic because there's nothing leisurely about it. If you're a boy from a wealthy family, your education formally begins around age 7. Girls? Sorry, you'll be learning household management from mom at home. The poor? You'll get your education in the fields or workshops where you'll be working from dawn till dusk. Education was never meant to be equal. Spoiler, this trend continues for about 2,300 more years, so don't feel too special about being excluded. Just think of it as getting a head start on life's disappointments. Your primary teacher, called a pedagogos, was often a slave who accompanied you to school and carried your writing materials. Yes, your teacher was literally someone's property. If you think your high school teachers were underpaid and underappreciated, imagine being owned by the family of the kid you're teaching. This teacher wasn't necessarily chosen for his knowledge of mathematics or literature, but rather because he was too old or injured to do real work. Congratulations, you're learning from someone who was deemed unfit for manual labor, but somehow qualified to shape young minds. Your classroom? Probably the instructor's home or a rented space with minimal furniture. No desks, no chairs, no smartboards, not even blackboards. You'll sit on the floor or a bench if you're lucky. Your school supplies consist of a wax tablet and stylus for writing, and your textbooks don't exist. Everything is memorization. Hope you have a good memory, because there's no looking back at notes or checking Google. You'll recite Homer until the Iliad and Odyssey are burned into your brain. Modern students complain about having to memorize multiplication tables. You'll memorize 27,000 lines of epic poetry. Physical punishment was the primary classroom management technique. Made a mistake in your recitation? That's a beating. Failed to solve a mathematical problem? That's a beating. Talked during the lesson? Oh, you better believe that's a beating. The rod was considered an essential teaching tool. The ancient Greek equivalent of spare the rod, spoil the child, was taken very seriously. If you think detention is rough, imagine being whipped for forgetting the correct conjugation of a verb. Your helicopter parents aren't around to complain to the principal about this treatment, either. Your curriculum consists of 3 main subjects: gymnastics, physical education, music, which includes poetry and literature, and academic subjects like arithmetic and geometry. Notice how coding and digital literacy aren't on that list. You won't be learning practical skills like farming or trade unless you're an apprentice. Upper-class education was designed to create well-rounded citizens who could participate in democracy, not to prepare you for a job. Just imagine trying to explain to your ancient Greek teacher that you want to become a social media influencer or a blockchain developer. In gymnastics, you'll train naked. Yes, you read that correctly. The word gymnasium comes from gymnos, meaning naked. You'll exercise, wrestle, and compete without a stitch of clothing, covered only in olive oil. If you're body conscious in the 21st century, imagine the anxiety of performing athletic feats while completely nude, with your teacher critiquing your form. Your javelin throw is weak, and everyone can see exactly how inadequate you are. Public nudity was normal for males in this context, but that doesn't make it any less mortifying for your modern sensibilities. Music education isn't just learning to play instruments. It includes reciting poetry, singing, and dancing. You'll learn to play the lyre or aulos, a reed instrument, but not because ancient Greeks valued self-expression. No, music was thought to shape moral character and was part of proper citizenship training. If you think your parents forcing you to take piano lessons was bad, imagine being told your moral fiber depends on your ability to play the ancient equivalent of a harp. And yes, performances were often public, so stage fright isn't an option. Your worth as a future citizen is on display. If you're training to be a philosopher, get ready for some intense dialectic education. This isn't just raising your hand to answer a question, it's verbal combat. Your teacher, like Socrates, might employ the Elenchus method, asking seemingly innocent questions that lead you into contradicting yourself, making you look like a complete idiot in front of everyone. Public humiliation was a feature, not a bug, of philosophical education. If you think being called on unexpectedly in class is stressful, try having your entire worldview systematically dismantled through strategic questioning while your peers watch and snicker. Hope you like homework, because you'll be expected to memorize vast portions of Homer, Hesiod, and other poets. These works serve as your literature, history, religious studies, and moral education all rolled into one. There's no Spark Notes, no Cliff's Notes, no YouTube summaries to help you cheat. You either know it or you don't, and not knowing means public shame and physical punishment. The pressure is immense, especially since recitations were often competitive. Your social standing among peers depends on how well you can recall whether it was Diomedes or Ajax who slew a particular Trojan warrior in book whatever of the Iliad. If you're in Athens and from a wealthy family, your education might continue to higher levels after age 14. You'll study rhetoric, public speaking and argumentation, more advanced mathematics, and philosophy. This isn't optional if you want to participate in political life. Imagine having to master public speaking not for a grade, but because your ability to protect your property, defend yourself in court, or participate in government literally depends on it. No pressure. In a society without professional lawyers, your rhetorical skills determine whether you keep your property or possibly your life when disputes arise. For those training to be philosophers, formal logic didn't even exist yet before Aristotle. So you're learning to think critically without the structured frameworks modern students take for granted. You're essentially building the airplane while flying it. The Socratic method involves questioning everything, but there's no textbook telling you which questions are the right ones to ask. You might spend hours debating whether virtue can be taught or what constitutes justice, with no clear answers. If you're the type who gets frustrated without definitive right or wrong answers, ancient philosophical training would drive you absolutely insane. Finally, if you're a Spartan boy, forget everything I just said. At age 7, you're sent to the Agoge, a militaristic training program that makes modern boot camp look like summer vacation. You'll be deliberately underfed to encourage stealing, a survival skill, but severely beaten if caught. You'll sleep outdoors on reed mats year-round. You'll be encouraged to fight other boys to establish dominance. Your education is primarily focused on creating the perfect warrior, not the perfect thinker. To graduate, you might need to murder a helot, state slave, as your final exam. If you think standardized testing causes anxiety, imagine having ritual murder as your senior project. But hey, at least you get a cool red cloak if you survive. Your day begins at dawn, because ancient Greeks didn't have the luxury of blackout curtains or the snooze button. You rise with the sun, not by choice, but because your simple wooden bed with its wool-stuffed mattress is about as comfortable as sleeping on a bag of slightly softened rocks. If you think memory foam mattresses are overrated, try sleeping on what amounts to a glorified pile of sheep hair for a few nights. Your back pain will make you philosophize about the nature of suffering in entirely new ways. Your morning routine doesn't include scrolling through social media or checking emails. Instead, you'll head to the nearest well or fountain house to collect water for washing. Indoor plumbing? Please. That's about 2,000 years in the future. Your bathroom consists of a clay basin and jug system that requires you to manually pour water over yourself while standing in a shallow basin. If you're wealthy, a slave might assist you. If not, you're on your own, awkwardly contorting to wash those hard-to-reach places. Soap is a luxury item made from animal fat and ash. Most days, you'll make do with olive oil, which you apply, then scrape off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, taking dirt and dead skin with it. Breakfast is simple, some bread dipped in watered wine. Yes, wine for breakfast. Perhaps some olives or dried figs if you're feeling fancy. Don't expect coffee to jumpstart your philosophical musings. Caffeine won't be introduced to the Western world for millennia. You're philosophizing on a clear head, which might explain why so many Greek philosophical debates dragged on for hours. Without caffeine, how did they maintain the energy for all that thinking? The answer: they didn't really have a choice. When your options are think deep thoughts or stare at a wall, philosophy starts looking pretty entertaining. Your wardrobe consists of variations on a single garment. The chiton, a rectangular piece of cloth pinned at the shoulders and belted at the waist. Fashion choices are limited to how do I drape this sheet today? You don't have an outfit for every day of the week. You have one outfit that is every day of the week. Laundry is done by hand using lye or urine. Yes, urine. The ammonia works as a cleaning agent, and then beaten against rocks in a stream or basin. If you think doing laundry is a chore now, imagine washing your clothes in pee and then pounding them on stones. Suddenly, the weekly trip to the laundromat doesn't seem so bad. Time to hit the streets of Athens for your morning philosophical discussions. Hope you enjoy walking, because that's your primary mode of transportation unless you're wealthy enough to own a horse or hire a cart. The streets are narrow, unpaved, and double as open sewers. That mysterious liquid running down the middle of the road? Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Your designer sneakers would be destroyed in minutes here, replaced by simple leather sandals that offer minimal protection from the filth beneath your feet. Just imagine trying to maintain your dignity while giving a lecture on the nature of virtue while standing in what might generously be called organic matter. The agora awaits, the heart of Athenian social, commercial, and philosophical life. This is where you'll spend most of your day, engaging in debates, teaching students, or just people watching. There are no coffee shops to sit in, no libraries with air conditioning, no quiet co-working spaces. Your office is wherever you can find a comfortable spot to stand or sit, preferably in the shade during summer, because Greek heat is no joke. If you think your open-plan office lacks privacy, try conducting all your business in a public square where anyone can wander up and start arguing with you about whether virtue can be taught. Lunch might be purchased from a street vendor, perhaps some bread with olive oil, a bit of cheese, or some roasted chickpeas. Fast food existed in ancient Greece, just without the drive-thru or the suspiciously immortal French fries. If you're wealthy or have wealthy students, you might be invited to someone's home for a meal. Hope you enjoy reclining while you eat, because proper Greek dining happens on couches called klini, with small tables for the food. Imagine trying to eat a messy gyro while essentially lying down. It's a skill you'll need to master if you want to be taken seriously in philosophical circles. Speaking of food, forget about tomatoes, potatoes, corn, chocolate, or vanilla. None of these ingredients existed in the Greek diet because they hadn't been brought from the Americas yet. No chili peppers, no bell peppers, no sugar as we know it. Your seasoning options are limited to herbs, honey, and garum, a fermented fish sauce that smells exactly as appetizing as it sounds. Your palate would be considered tragically underdeveloped by modern foodie standards. When was the last time you got excited about fermented fish guts as a condiment? That's what I thought. Afternoon activities might include a trip to the gymnasium, where philosophical discussions often continued amidst athletic training. Remember, Gymnasium means place where people exercise naked, so hope you're comfortable with nudity. You'll strip down, oil up, and engage in wrestling, running, or discus throwing while simultaneously debating the nature of reality. Multitasking at its finest. If you think it's hard to sound intelligent during a work presentation, try expounding on metaphysics while naked, sweaty, and winded from physical exertion. Your body image issues would be getting quite the philosophical examination. Hygiene throughout the day is minimal by modern standards. Deodorant doesn't exist. Teeth are cleaned with frayed twigs or cloths rubbed with abrasives like pumice. Bad breath is combated by chewing aromatic herbs, not Altoids. Public toilets, where they exist, are essentially benches with holes, arranged side by side with no dividers. Your bathroom anxiety would reach new philosophical heights as you sit shoulder to shoulder with fellow citizens, making small talk while handling your business. Just imagine discussing platonic forms while sitting 12 inches away from a stranger also using the facilities. As evening approaches, oil lamps provide your only artificial light source. These small clay vessels filled with olive oil offer about as much illumination as a birthday candle, making reading or writing after dark a strain on the eyes. There's a reason many Greek philosophers preferred oral traditions. Trying to read a hand-copied scroll by lamplight would give you a migraine. Your productive hours are limited by daylight, and your evenings are probably spent at symposia, drinking parties, where philosophical discussions continue over wine. Lots of wine. These aren't gentle wine tastings, but competitive drinking events where water and wine are mixed in varying ratios depending on how wild the night is intended to be. Finally, bedtime arrives, and you return to your simple dwelling with its lack of climate control, comfortable furniture, or privacy. Your evening routine doesn't include Netflix, social media, or even reading a good book in bed. You might review the day's philosophical discussions in your mind as you lie on your wool-stuffed mattress, scratching at flea bites and listening to the sounds of the city settling down for the night. As you drift off to sleep, you might wonder about the nature of dreams or whether your philosophical musings today got you any closer to understanding the universe. Or you might just be wondering if that itches from fleas, bedbugs, or lice, all common bedfellows in ancient Greece. Sweet dreams, philosopher. Tomorrow brings another day of discomfort, deep thoughts, and debating whether reality is an illusion while your stomach grumbles from a diet that would make a modern nutritionist weep. So you want to be a Greek philosopher? Congratulations on choosing one of the least practical career paths in ancient Greece. Unlike modern academics with tenure, research grants, and university salaries, ancient Greek philosophers weren't paid for their philosophical work. There's no philosophy department offering a stable income while you ponder the nature of reality. Philosophical pursuits were generally for those wealthy enough to have leisure time or willing to live in extreme poverty. If you're expecting a regular paycheck for your deep thoughts, you've chosen the wrong historical period. Hope you have a trust fund or don't mind begging. If you're following the Socratic model, your work consists primarily of wandering around Athens, engaging citizens in philosophical dialogues, and systematically proving that they know nothing. Spoiler, this method won't make you popular with the authorities. Socrates was literally sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and impiety. Your job security comes with a side of hemlock if you're too effective at making important people question their beliefs. Just imagine trying to explain that career risk to your career counselor. Yes, I'm passionate about philosophical inquiry, but I'm concerned about the whole executed by the state thing. Is there a safer option? Perhaps you're more of an Aristotelian type, preferring to establish a school like the Lyceum. Founding your own academy means you'll need wealthy patrons or students willing to pay for your wisdom. Hope you're good at networking and don't mind a bit of philosophical prostitution, teaching the children of the rich and powerful, even if their intellectual capabilities extend about as far as a puddle in the Athenian summer. Your survival depends on their parents' continued financial support, which means occasionally telling them their dim-witted offspring has great potential despite evidence to the contrary. Your daily work schedule isn't the modern 9 to 5. As a philosopher, you rise with the sun and might spend the early morning writing or preparing lectures. There's no coffee to fuel your deep thoughts, no computer to organize your ideas, just sunlight, a stylus, and wax tablets or expensive papyrus if you can afford it. Writer's block isn't just an inconvenience. It's potentially financially ruinous when writing materials cost a significant portion of your monthly income. If you think expensive ink cartridges are a racket, try paying for papyrus imported from Egypt. Teaching doesn't happen in convenient hour-long blocks with scheduled breaks. Philosophical instruction might last all day, conducted while walking through the city, peripatetics, sitting in the marketplace, cynics, or reclining at symposia, basically everyone. There's no clear distinction between work and leisure, professional and personal. Your entire life is your philosophical practice. Work-life balance. That concept is about 2,400 years in the future. You're either philosophizing or sleeping, with occasional breaks for bodily necessities. If you think modern hustle culture is intense, try being Diogenes, who lived in a ceramic jar to demonstrate his rejection of material comfort. Documentation is a nightmare. Without printing presses, photocopiers, or shared Google Docs, your philosophical ideas are disseminated through handwritten scrolls copied by students or professional scribes. Errors creep in with each copying, like a millennia-long game of telephone. Your brilliant insights might be completely misunderstood by future generations because some sleep-deprived student accidentally skipped a line while copying your masterwork at 3 a.m. by oil lamp. If you think it's frustrating when someone misinterprets your email, imagine your entire philosophical legacy being distorted because someone couldn't read your handwriting. If you're a cynic philosopher like Diogenes, your work involves publicly rejecting social conventions in the most shocking ways possible. This includes, but is not limited to, public urination, masturbation, and living in extreme poverty by choice. Your philosophical method is essentially performance art designed to shock people into questioning their values. Most modern people can't even handle being embarrassed on social media. Imagine deliberately defecating in the marketplace to make a philosophical point about natural human functions. Your commitment to philosophical principles would need to overcome every social norm you've ever internalized. For Stoic philosophers, your work includes rigorous self-examination and emotional regulation practices that make modern mindfulness look like amateur hour. You're not just trying to manage stress. You're aiming to become completely unmoved by external circumstances, including poverty, exile, illness, and death. Your daily philosophical practice might include deliberately exposing yourself to discomfort or contemplating the worst possible scenarios to immunize yourself against fear. If you think cold showers for mental toughness are challenging, try Cato the Younger walking bareheaded in the rain or sleeping on the hard ground by choice to practice enduring hardship. Research methods are painfully limited. Need information? Hope you know someone who knows something about your subject, or that you can afford to travel to where the knowledge exists. There are no search engines, no academic databases, not even a public library system as we understand it. The Great Library of Alexandria won't exist until the Hellenistic period, and even then, you'd need to physically go there to access its contents. Your literature review consists of whatever scrolls you can personally examine or whatever ideas you've heard secondhand from other philosophers, merchants, or travelers. The potential for working with outdated or simply wrong information is enormous. Interdisciplinary work is challenging when disciplines barely exist as distinct fields. As a philosopher, you're simultaneously expected to understand mathematics, astronomy, physics, biology, ethics, politics, and rhetoric. Academic specialization is millennia away. You can't just be good at ethics but not really into physics. Your philosophical credibility depends on having coherent thoughts about the entire cosmos. If you think it's hard keeping up with developments in your field now, imagine trying to stay current on every branch of human knowledge while also having to walk everywhere and hand copy any information you want to preserve. Peer review? More like peer ridicule. Your ideas aren't evaluated through anonymous feedback on journal submissions, but through public debates where your opponents actively try to humiliate you. Think modern academic discourse is cutthroat? Ancient philosophical debates could involve actual shouting matches in the agora, with the winner determined by public opinion. Your entire reputation could be destroyed in a single debate if you couldn't think quickly on your feet. Stage fright isn't just embarrassing, it's career-ending. And unlike modern academics who can hide behind email when critiquing colleagues, you'd be delivering your critiques face-to-face to people who might hold grudges for decades. Finally, your philosophical legacy depends entirely on whether your students or followers bother to preserve your ideas after your death. Many brilliant pre-Socratic philosophers are known to us only through fragments and second-hand accounts because their original works didn't survive. Your life's work, your profound insights, your careful arguments, all could be lost to history because some monk in the Middle Ages decided your scrolls would be better used for copying religious texts. If you think it's frustrating when your hard drive crashes and you lose a few documents, imagine your entire intellectual legacy being erased because someone needed parchment and yours was handy. You might be the most brilliant mind of your generation, but without a good PR team of dedicated disciples, you're just another forgotten thinker in the dustbin of philosophical history. Hope you're a man, because if you're a woman, your philosophical career options are severely limited. Female philosophers existed. Aspasia, Hipparchia, and Arete come to mind. But they were exceptional cases who overcame tremendous societal barriers. As a woman, you'd be expected to manage the household rather than engage in public philosophical debates. Even the progressive Plato, who argued women could be philosopher rulers in his ideal state, didn't actually teach many women. If you think the gender gap in philosophy departments today is bad, and it is, ancient Athens would make your blood boil. Spoiler, this won't end well for gender equality for about another 2,400 years. Your family relationships as a philosopher might be strained. Just ask Socrates, whose wife Xanthippe was reportedly so irritated by his philosophical lifestyle that she once dumped a chamber pot over his head. Can you blame her? Imagine your spouse bringing home no income, spending all day in public arguments, gathering a group of adoring young men who follow him everywhere, and claiming it's all in service of wisdom. Sorry, honey, I can't get a real job because I'm too busy examining the unexamined life. You'd probably reach for the chamber pot too. The work-life balance of a dedicated philosopher often meant choosing between wisdom and domestic harmony. Marriage itself was primarily a practical arrangement in ancient Greece, particularly for Athenians. Men typically married in their 30s, while their brides were often teenagers. Romantic love wasn't a prerequisite for marriage. That's what extramarital relationships were for. As a philosopher, you might view marriage as Socrates did, a testing ground for your patience and character development. If you can learn to live with a difficult spouse, he allegedly said, you can get along with anyone. Just imagine relationship counseling ancient Greek style. Your marriage isn't failing. It's a philosophical exercise in endurance. Somehow, that approach didn't save Socrates from the chamber pot incident. Friendship in philosophical circles was intense by modern standards. Aristotle dedicated 2 entire books of his Nicomachean Ethics to friendship, considering it among the greatest goods in life. But these weren't casual friendships forged over coffee or happy hour drinks. Philosophical friendships involved deep intellectual engagement, moral development, and mutual criticism. Your friends wouldn't just like your social media posts. They'd eviscerate your logical fallacies and call out your moral failings. If you think friends today can be judgmental, try having Diogenes in your social circle, publicly mocking your life choices and calling you a hypocrite. Unfriending wasn't an option in the agora. Speaking of Diogenes, let's discuss reputation. As a philosopher, your entire life was public performance. Citizens observed and judged your daily behavior, expecting consistency between your teachings and actions. When Alexander the Great found Diogenes lounging in the sun and asked what he could do for the famous cynic, Diogenes replied, "Stand out of my sun." This level of philosophical commitment either made you revered or reviled. If you think it's stressful when your Instagram post doesn't get enough likes, imagine the pressure when your every action is scrutinized for philosophical consistency. There was no private mode for ancient philosophers. You were always on stage. Your social status as a philosopher was complicated. Some, like Plato, came from aristocratic families and maintained high social standing. Others, like Epictetus, began as slaves. Many deliberately rejected status symbols, with cynics taking this to extreme levels by living like beggars. The philosophical life often required a willful step down the social ladder, challenging the status-seeking that dominated Athenian society. If you're the type who gets excited about job titles or verification badges on social media, You'd struggle with the philosophical commitment to disregard such trivial markers of status. Imagine deliberately tanking your social standing to prove a philosophical point about the emptiness of social recognition. Your personal brand manager would have an existential crisis. Your relationship with students would raise eyebrows in modern contexts. The Eras Ceraminos relationship, an older man mentoring a younger one, often had romantic and sexual dimensions that modern professional ethics would absolutely prohibit. Even if you personally kept things platonic, the social expectation that philosophical mentorship might include physical intimacy would make modern HR departments spontaneously combust. Just imagine trying to explain ancient Greek pedagogical relationships at a university ethics training. So the student-teacher relationship was potentially sexual, but it was also about transmitting wisdom and virtue. Good luck with that Title IX investigation. Political relationships were unavoidable for philosophers. Unlike modern academics who can remain relatively disconnected from political life, ancient Greek philosophers were expected to be engaged citizens. This engagement could be dangerous. Socrates was executed for his political provocations, Aristotle fled Athens to avoid a similar fate, and Plato was briefly sold into slavery after angering a tyrant. If you think Thanksgiving dinner conversations about politics are uncomfortable, try philosophizing in a direct democracy where your controversial opinions could literally get you killed. There was no tenure protection, no academic freedom, just the constant risk that your philosophical positions might anger the wrong people. Your relationship with wealth would likely be complicated. Many philosophical schools advocated forms of simple living or even asceticism. Stoics taught indifference to material comfort. Cynics rejected property altogether, and even the wealthy Plato lived more modestly than his status allowed. The conspicuous consumption that drives modern economies would be philosophical anathema. If you enjoy your creature comforts, your memory foam mattress, your artisanal coffee, your climate-controlled environment, you'd struggle with the deliberate material deprivation many philosophical schools advocated. Imagine voluntarily living below the poverty line to demonstrate your philosophical integrity while your non-philosophical neighbors enjoy relative luxury. Your Instagram lifestyle influencer dreams would be severely compromised. Competition defined philosophical relationships in ways modern collaboration doesn't. Different schools actively tried to discredit each other, sometimes through formal debates, sometimes through public mockery. Your philosophical opponents weren't just people with different views. They were threats to your reputation, your student recruitment, and potentially your livelihood. If you think academic Twitter spats get heated, imagine Diogenes plucking a chicken and throwing it at Plato after he defined humans as featherless bipeds, shouting, "Behold, Plato's human." This wasn't civil disagreement. It was philosophical combat sport, conducted without the protective buffer of screens or publication delays. Your relationship with food and drink would be philosophically significant. Symposia, drinking parties where philosophical discussions occurred, were central to intellectual life. However, different philosophical schools had radically different approaches to pleasure. Epicureans advocated moderate enjoyment. Stoics emphasized indifference to pleasure, and Cynics sometimes deliberately rejected basic comforts. Your dietary choices weren't just personal preferences, but philosophical statements. If you think modern dinner parties get judgmental about dietary restrictions, imagine announcing you're following a Cynic diet plan. "Oh, I only eat the simplest foods in public with my hands," while occasionally making pointed remarks about how your elaborate meal preparation reveals your slavery to convention. You wouldn't get many repeat invitations. Religious relationships were inescapable and potentially dangerous. Despite being free thinkers, philosophers still lived in a society where religious observance was tied to citizenship and social belonging. Accusations of impiety, like those leveled against Socrates, could be fatal. Even as you developed naturalistic explanations for phenomena attributed to the gods, you'd still need to participate in religious festivals and rituals. If you think it's awkward navigating holiday traditions you no longer believe in, try maintaining philosophical integrity while publicly worshiping gods whose existence your teachings implicitly question. The cognitive dissonance would be excruciating, and the consequences for resolving it too openly could be deadly. Finally, your relationship with your own mortality would become a central philosophical preoccupation. Without modern medicine, death was a constant companion. Infant mortality was high, plagues swept through cities regularly, and violence was common. Philosophical schools developed elaborate approaches to accepting mortality, from the Epicurean argument that death is nothing to us to the Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering you will die. If contemplating your own mortality sends you into an existential crisis, ancient Greek philosophy would force you to face that fear daily. Your philosophical credibility depended on demonstrating composure in the face of death, not just theoretically, but when actually confronting your end, as Socrates famously did with his cup of hemlock. Death wasn't an abstract concept to philosophize about from a safe distance. It was the ultimate test of whether you truly lived by your philosophical principles. Welcome to the complex religious landscape of ancient Greece, where being a philosopher is essentially walking a theological tightrope over a pit of hemlock. Let's start with a fundamental misconception. Ancient Greek religion wasn't some casual, flexible belief system where you could pick and choose which gods to acknowledge. Public worship and participation in religious festivals weren't optional social activities. They were civic duties tied to your identity as an Athenian citizen. If you think your family gets judgmental when you skip holiday services, imagine facing official charges of impiety, asabeia, carrying penalties ranging from fines to exile or execution. Socrates wasn't sentenced to death for being annoying, though he was. The official charge was impiety and corrupting the youth. The Greek pantheon included hundreds of deities, not just the 12 Olympians you might remember from elementary school. Each city had its patron gods. Each profession had its divine protectors. Each natural phenomenon had its associated deity or nymph or spirit. As a philosopher questioning conventional beliefs, you'd still need to navigate a world where people genuinely believed that illness might be Apollo's punishment, that a storm at sea was Poseidon's wrath, or that a sudden inspiration came directly from the muses. Trying to introduce naturalistic explanations for these phenomena wouldn't make you seem clever. It would make you seem dangerously impious. Just imagine being the person at a funeral saying, "Actually, your father didn't die because the gods willed it. It was just bacteria." You wouldn't be winning any popularity contests. Religious rituals permeated daily life. Before important philosophical discussions, you'd pour libations to the gods. Before meals, you'd offer portions to divine powers. Before entering your home, you might acknowledge Hestia, goddess of the hearth. These weren't empty gestures, but essential practices believed to maintain cosmic order and divine favor. If you think it's hard to remember to say "bless you" after someone sneezes, try navigating the hundreds of small religious observances required to avoid divine offense in ancient Greece. One forgotten offering before an important debate could be interpreted as the reason your arguments fell flat. You lost that dialectical exchange because you forgot to honor Athena this morning, would be the ancient Greek equivalent of "you're just hangry." Divination was taken extremely seriously, even by educated Greeks. Military campaigns were launched or delayed based on the flight patterns of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals. The oracle at Delphi influenced major political decisions across the Greek world. As a philosopher, you might privately doubt these methods while publicly participating in them. Xenophanes and other pre-Socratics criticized anthropomorphic conceptions of the gods, but they did so carefully, proposing alternative theological frameworks rather than rejecting religion outright. If you think it's awkward when someone at dinner insists on reading everyone's horoscope, imagine living in a society where important decisions were routinely made by examining a goat's liver. Your rational objections wouldn't be met with good-natured eye-rolling, but with genuine concern for the city's welfare. Philosophical schools developed varying approaches to religion. Epicureans argued that gods existed but didn't concern themselves with human affairs, effectively rendering religious anxiety pointless. Stoics reinterpreted gods as aspects of an overarching divine reason permeating the cosmos. Skeptics suspended judgment on theological claims. Few philosophers advocated what we would recognize as atheism. Denying the existence of gods entirely would be philosophical suicide in ancient Greece. If you think navigating religious differences at family gatherings is challenging, imagine developing a philosophical framework that questioned prevailing religious beliefs without explicitly rejecting them. It required linguistic and conceptual gymnastics that would make modern politicians' evasive answers seem straightforward. Superstitions governed daily activities beyond formal religious observance. Specific days of the month were considered unlucky for certain activities. Dreams were analyzed for prophetic content. Particular locations were avoided due to associations with chthonic, underworld, powers. As a philosopher, you'd be caught between rational analysis and the social necessity of acknowledging these beliefs. When your host rearranges dinner seating because 13 guests would be unlucky, you might roll your eyes internally, but outwardly participating in these social conventions was often necessary for philosophical survival. If you think it's silly when someone avoids walking under ladders, imagine living in a society where practically every action had potential supernatural significance. The cognitive dissonance would be exhausting. Mystery cults offered alternative religious experiences to state religion, promising special knowledge and afterlife benefits to initiates. The Eleusinian mysteries, worshipping Demeter and Persephone, attracted many philosophers seeking deeper religious experience. These weren't fringe cults, but respected institutions. Yet their proceedings remained secret, with initiates forbidden from revealing what they experienced. As a philosopher seeking knowledge in all forms, you might participate in these mysteries while maintaining philosophical skepticism about their claims. If you think it's hard to evaluate the legitimacy of online courses promising secret knowledge, imagine deciding whether to undergo mysterious initiation rites with the promise of spiritual revelation that you can never discuss with non-initiates. FOMO in ancient Greece had metaphysical dimensions. The concept of miasma, pollution, or impurity created anxiety around numerous ordinary activities. Contact with birth, death, sex, or violence could render a person ritually impure, requiring purification before participating in religious activities or entering sacred spaces. This wasn't just spiritual concern, but practical reality. Showing up to a temple festival in a state of miasma could be seen as deliberate impiety. If you think hand sanitizer protocols during COVID were complicated, try keeping track of your ritual purity status and the appropriate cleansing rituals for different forms of pollution. Sorry, I can't attend the philosophical debate today. I accidentally walked past a funeral procession and need to undergo purification would be a legitimate excuse in ancient Athens. The afterlife presented another religious complication for philosophers. Popular conceptions imagined the psyche, soul, continuing in a shadowy existence in Hades, with punishment for the wicked and potentially special treatment for heroes and the virtuous. Philosophical schools developed sophisticated arguments about the soul's immortality, Plato, or its material dissolution at death, Epicurus. Threading the needle between philosophical inquiry into the afterlife and respect for traditional beliefs required careful framing. If you think conversations about what happens after death are awkward now, imagine developing a philosophical argument that the soul isn't immortal in a culture where proper funeral rites were believed essential for the deceased's journey to the underworld. Your theoretical position could be interpreted as threatening the welfare of departed loved ones. Religious festivals dominated the Athenian calendar, with approximately half the year dedicated to various celebrations. These weren't optional cultural events, but civic and religious obligations. Major festivals like the Panathenea or Dionysia involved the entire city in processions, sacrifices, competitions, and dramatic performances. As a philosopher, you'd participate in these events regardless of your private theological positions. If you think it's exhausting when the holiday season stretches from Halloween to New Year's, imagine living with religious festivals occupying half the year, each with specific rituals and obligations you couldn't skip without social consequences. Your philosophical contemplation schedule would be constantly interrupted by processions, sacrifices, and all-night festival celebrations. The boundary between religion and state didn't exist in ancient Greece. Political decisions were simultaneously religious ones, and religious authorities held significant political influence. Impiety wasn't just a religious offense, but a civic one, potentially threatening the gods' favor toward the entire city. This created a precarious position for philosophers whose inquiries might challenge conventional beliefs. If you think the intersection of religion and politics creates tension in modern democracies, imagine a society where the distinction between religious and political authority was essentially meaningless. Your philosophical questioning could be interpreted not just as intellectual exploration, but as endangering the divine favor that protected your city from plague, famine, and military defeat. Finally, as a philosopher, your death would become the ultimate test of your theological positions. Socrates famously faced execution with remarkable composure, maintaining philosophical dialogue until his final moments. The Stoic emphasis on accepting death reflected not just psychological training, but engagement with religious concepts of fate and cosmic order. Your philosophical credibility would be judged by how you faced death, with alignment between your teachings and your final moments. If you find it stressful when people point out inconsistencies between your words and actions, imagine the pressure of knowing your final moments would be scrutinized for philosophical consistency. Your deathbed would become your final philosophical statement, remembered and interpreted by generations of followers. In ancient Greece, you couldn't just talk the philosophical talk. Your final moments would reveal whether you truly walked the philosophical walk, a terrifying prospect for anyone whose confidence in their beliefs occasionally wavers. Being a philosopher in ancient Greece wasn't just intellectually challenging, it was physically perilous. Let's start with the most obvious threat: disease. Ancient Greece was a microbiological nightmare with no antibiotics, limited understanding of contagion, and public hygiene practices that would make a modern health inspector faint. The miasma theory of disease blamed bad air rather than germs, so your preventative measures might include carrying sweet-smelling herbs instead of washing your hands. If you think anti-vaxxers have questionable health approaches, imagine treating an infected wound with a poultice of herbs while praying to Asclepius and hoping for the best. Spoiler: this won't end well for your infected paper cut that's now turning an alarming shade of green. Water was a daily gamble. Clean drinking water wasn't guaranteed, and waterborne illnesses were constant companions. Most Greeks drank diluted wine not just for pleasure, but because fermentation made it safer than water. Your philosophical debates about the nature of reality might be regularly interrupted by severe digestive distress from that questionable well water you drank yesterday. If you think food poisoning ruins your weekend now, imagine battling dysentery without modern medicine while trying to maintain philosophical composure. The wise man acknowledges that bodily suffering is immaterial to true happiness. You might wheeze unconvincingly between urgent trips to the ancient Greek equivalent of a bathroom, which was basically a pot or a hole in the ground. Speaking of food, hope you're not picky about food safety standards. Without refrigeration, preservatives, or basic understanding of bacterial contamination, food poisoning was a regular event. Meat was consumed quickly after slaughter, fish spoiled rapidly in the Mediterranean heat, and dairy products turned faster than you could say philosophical dialectic. Your stoic detachment from physical discomfort would get a rigorous workout every time you attended a symposium where the food had been sitting out just a little too long. If you think your sensitive modern stomach gets upset easily, imagine the intestinal fortitude required to survive regular exposure to ancient Greek food handling practices. Your philosophical arguments about pleasure being inferior to virtue would be severely tested during your third consecutive day of foodborne illness. Violence was another everyday concern. Ancient Greek cities weren't peaceful havens of philosophical contemplation, but often dangerous places, especially at night. Without street lighting, police forces, or cell phones to call for help, venturing out after dark was risky business. Muggings, assaults, and murders weren't uncommon, particularly in certain neighborhoods. Your profound thoughts on ethics might be interrupted by the very practical concern of whether you'll make it home safely from the symposium. If you think walking through a sketchy neighborhood today makes you nervous, try navigating pitch-black streets in ancient Athens where your oil lamp makes you an obvious target for criminals. Your philosophical musings on the nature of fear would become remarkably concrete experiences. Political violence posed another threat, especially for philosophers whose teachings challenged the status quo. Socrates' execution is the most famous example, but many philosophers faced exile, imprisonment, or threats of violence for their ideas. The line between philosophical inquiry and political subversion was razor-thin, and crossing it could be fatal. If you think cancel culture seems harsh, imagine expressing controversial views in a society where hemlock was the ultimate cancellation. Your carefully reasoned arguments about justice could lead directly to charges of impiety or corrupting the youth, with consequences far more severe than angry tweets or lost speaking engagements. War was a constant backdrop to Greek life, with cities frequently in conflict with each other or facing external threats. Athens and Sparta were bitter rivals, engaging in the devastating Peloponnesian War that lasted nearly 3 decades. As a resident of a Greek city-state, you might be called to military service regardless of your philosophical objections to violence. If you think mandatory jury duty is an inconvenience, imagine being handed a shield and spear and told to march against the Spartan phalanx. Your theoretical positions on courage and duty would face immediate practical testing as you stood shoulder to shoulder with fellow citizens in a bronze-armored line, waiting for the enemy charge. Nothing clarifies your thoughts on mortality quite like someone actively trying to kill you. Natural disasters struck without warning or scientific explanation. Earthquakes, floods, droughts, and fires were interpreted as divine punishment rather than geological or meteorological events. When disaster struck, religious fervor often intensified, creating a dangerous environment for philosophers associated with naturalistic explanations or religious skepticism. If you think climate change discussions get heated, imagine suggesting non-divine explanations for a devastating earthquake right after it happened. Your rational approach would seem not just incorrect, but impious and dangerous to a community seeking divine appeasement. The correlation between natural disasters and philosopher persecution was no coincidence. Crisis tends to amplify conservative religious sentiment. Medical emergencies were particularly terrifying in a world without anesthesia, antibiotics, or germ theory. Surgery was performed without pain management beyond alcohol and perhaps opium. Childbirth was extremely dangerous for women. Broken bones, infected wounds, and internal injuries that would be treatable today were often fatal. Your philosophical detachment from physical pain would face the ultimate test when a tooth abscess required extraction without anesthesia. If you think modern medical procedures cause anxiety, imagine facing surgery performed by someone who believed illness was caused by imbalanced humors and who washed their hands only for ritual purity, not germ prevention. Your stoic exercises and pain tolerance would suddenly seem woefully inadequate. Accidents had much higher stakes in ancient Greece. A broken leg that would mean 6 weeks in a cast today could mean permanent disability or death from infection. Falls, burns, animal attacks, and workplace injuries that would be inconveniences in the modern world were life-threatening crises. Your philosophical contemplation of fate might take on new urgency after watching a friend die slowly from complications of what began as a simple fall. If you think it's frustrating when breaking your phone screen disrupts your day, imagine breaking your leg in a world where the standard treatment involved primitive setting of the bone, rudimentary splints, and prayers to healing deities. Your ability to update your philosophical blog would be severely compromised by the fever from your now-infected fracture. Social ostracism could be formalized through the practice of actual ostracism, where citizens voted to exile individuals considered threatening to the state. This wasn't just social rejection, but legal banishment for 10 years. Philosophers whose teachings seemed dangerous could find themselves suddenly voted out of Athens, forced to abandon students, property, and family. If you think being unfriended on social media feels exclusionary, imagine 6,000 of your fellow citizens anonymously voting to kick you out of the country for a decade. Your philosophical teachings about justice and civic virtue would face a severe reality check when the very democratic processes you analyzed were used to send you packing with minimal warning or recourse. Philosophical rivalries occasionally turned dangerous. Diogenes and the Cynics were known for confrontational, sometimes aggressive public challenges to other philosophers. Academic disagreements weren't limited to strongly worded journal articles, but could involve public humiliation, physical intimidation, or even violence. Your carefully constructed metaphysical system might earn you not just intellectual criticism, but a punch in the face from a rival philosopher who found your arguments about materialism personally offensive. If you think academic Twitter gets nasty, imagine debating someone who might physically attack you for your ontological positions. Philosophical debate in ancient Greece required not just mental agility, but sometimes physical self-defense skills. Food scarcity was a recurring threat, especially in cities dependent on imported grain like Athens. Crop failures, trade disruptions, or war could quickly lead to severe shortages and sky-high prices. Philosophical debates about virtuous living take on different dimensions when you're literally starving. Your Epicurean arguments about pleasure being the absence of pain would sound hollow to hungry students. If you think grocery shortages during the pandemic were stressful, imagine living in a city where a bad harvest or naval blockade could mean mass starvation within weeks. Your philosophical detachment from material needs would face extreme testing when food became unavailable at any price and your sophisticated brain began shutting down from caloric deprivation. Finally, the legal system offered minimal protections for the falsely accused. Without professional judges, standardized legal codes, or the concept of innocent until proven guilty, you could find yourself facing serious charges with limited defense options. Courts were often swayed by emotional appeals rather than evidence, and juries could number in the hundreds or thousands, making them susceptible to mob mentality. Your philosophical principles might be cold comfort when facing a hostile jury predetermined to find you guilty of impiety. If you think modern legal systems have flaws, imagine defending yourself against vague charges before hundreds of your fellow citizens who've already been influenced by rumors about your dangerous teachings. Your carefully reasoned legal defense would need to compete with a prosecutor's emotional appeals to tradition and religious fear. The hemlock awaits those who can't persuade the crowd, regardless of truth or justice. A sobering reality check for any philosopher convinced that rational argument always prevails. Welcome to the roller coaster of philosophical fame in ancient Greece, where the heights of glory and the depths of humiliation are separated by a razor's edge. Let's start with the pinnacle of philosophical achievement, founding your own school. Plato established the academy, Aristotle created the Lyceum, Epicurus had his garden, and Zeno taught at the Stoa Poikile, giving Stoicism its name. If you managed this feat, congratulations. You've achieved philosophical immortality, or at least a Wikipedia page. But before you start drafting your acceptance speech for the ancient Greek Philosophical Hall of Fame, remember that maintaining a school required political connections, financial resources, and avoiding saying anything too offensive to powerful people. If you think university politics today are brutal, imagine running a philosophical institution where a change in government could literally mean execution for you and exile for your students. Public debates were the TED Talks of ancient Greece, opportunities for philosophical glory or catastrophic embarrassment. Picture this. You're arguing your carefully developed theory of forms in the agora, confident in your logical prowess, when Diogenes shows up with a plucked chicken, throws it at your feet, and shouts, "Behold, Plato's man," referencing Plato's definition of humans as featherless bipeds. The crowd roars with laughter, and your dignified philosophical position collapses under the weight of a naked bird. If you think being ratioed on Twitter is humiliating, imagine having your life's work publicly ridiculed by a half-naked philosopher who lives in a ceramic jar. Your reputation might never recover from becoming the ancient Greek equivalent of a viral meme. Plato Chicken Guy would follow you for the rest of your career. Teaching a successful student could bring reflected glory, unless they surpassed you or turned against your teachings. Plato taught Aristotle, who went on to reject key elements of Platonic thought. Socrates taught Critias, who became one of the 30 tyrants whose brutal reign terrorized Athens. Your star pupil might become your greatest achievement or your most embarrassing association. If you think it's awkward when former friends unfollow you on social media, imagine the discomfort when your philosophical protege publishes a treatise systematically dismantling your life's work. Your legacy would be permanently entangled with your students' achievements and crimes, with no ability to untag yourself from their more problematic moments. Writing influential philosophical texts could establish your immortality if they survived. Most works by pre-Socratic philosophers exist only in fragments quoted by later authors. Imagine spending decades perfecting your philosophical system, carefully documenting your ideas on expensive papyrus scrolls, only for history to remember you through a handful of sentences quoted out of context by your critics. If you think it's frustrating when people misrepresent your views based on out-of-context quotes today, imagine your entire philosophical legacy being reduced to whatever passages your intellectual opponents found most useful to ridicule. Your profound insights into the nature of reality might be lost forever because some Alexandria librarian decided other scrolls were more worth saving from fire or decay. Securing a wealthy patron could provide financial stability and protection, or end in disaster if you offended them. Plato's attempts to educate the tyrant Dionysius II of Syracuse failed spectacularly, nearly resulting in Plato's execution or enslavement. Aristotle tutored Alexander the Great, a relationship that later became complicated when Alexander's conquests conflicted with Aristotle's political views. If you think office politics are tricky when your boss has different values, imagine navigating a philosophical relationship with a temperamental tyrant who could have you killed on a whim. Your treatise on the limits of power might need significant revision when your patron reminds you who controls the palace guard. Coining a memorable philosophical phrase could ensure your ideas outlived you. Know thyself, attributed to several sages. The unexamined life is not worth living, Socrates, and no man steps in the same river twice, Heraclitus, have survived millennia. But for every philosopher remembered for brilliant sayings, countless others faded into obscurity despite equally valid insights. If you think it's maddening when your thoughtful social media posts get ignored while someone else's vacuous platitude goes viral, imagine the cosmic injustice of history remembering some philosophical sound bite you casually tossed off while drinking at a symposium, rather than the comprehensive ethical system you spent decades developing. Your philosophical legacy might depend less on the depth of your thoughts than on their bumper sticker potential. Dramatic death scenes could cement philosophical reputations. Socrates' dignified acceptance of his execution, continuing philosophical discussions until the hemlock took effect, became the ultimate demonstration of his principles. Empedocles supposedly jumped into Mount Etna to prove his divinity. Spoiler: the volcano was unimpressed. If you think people judge your commitment to principles in life, wait until they evaluate how you face death. Your philosophical credibility might ultimately rest on whether you can maintain logical coherence while literally dying, with students taking notes on your final gasps for posterity. No pressure. Just make sure your last words are quotable and consistent with your teachings, even as your nervous system shuts down. Epic failure was always just one bad argument away. The philosopher Stilpo was allegedly banished from Athens for proving logically that Athena was not a goddess. Protagoras had his books publicly burned for expressing agnosticism about the gods. Anaxagoras was imprisoned for suggesting the sun was a hot stone rather than a deity. If you think cancel culture is harsh, imagine having your works literally set on fire and being exiled from your home city for a philosophical thought experiment. Your clever logical proof could transition from intellectual triumph to personal catastrophe in the time it takes an angry mob to form. The line between philosophical genius and impious criminal was thin enough to slip across without even realizing you'd done it until the authorities arrived at your door. Being immortalized in another philosopher's dialogues could bring lasting fame, but not necessarily as you might hope. Most of what we know about Socrates comes from Plato's dialogues, where Socrates always gets the best lines and wins every argument. Thrasymachus, Gorgias, and countless others are remembered primarily as philosophical foils who exist to be systematically demolished by Socratic questioning. If you think it's annoying when someone misrepresents your position in an online debate, imagine being immortalized for 2,400 years as the guy who made a stupid argument that Socrates brilliantly refuted. Your philosophical legacy would be entirely in someone else's control, with no opportunity for rebuttal or clarification. That's not what I meant. Falls on deaf ears across millennia. Political involvement offered philosophers the chance to implement their ideas and to face spectacular downfall when reality failed to cooperate with theory. Plato's attempts to create his ideal state in Syracuse ended in failure. Demetrius of Phalerum governed Athens for a decade before being overthrown and narrowly escaping execution. If you think it's embarrassing when your carefully planned project fails at work, Imagine the humiliation of your entire philosophical system being discredited because your practical implementation resulted in political disaster. Your beautiful theory about the perfect society might collapse upon contact with actual humans who stubbornly refuse to behave as your philosophical model predicted they would. Finally, the ultimate philosophical achievement was creating a school of thought that outlived you. But this was exceedingly rare. For every successful philosophical tradition like Stoicism, Epicureanism, or Platonism, countless philosophical approaches disappeared within a generation of their founder's death. Even successful schools often became distorted beyond recognition as later adherents reinterpreted original teachings. If you think it's frustrating when people misuse terms you've carefully defined, imagine watching from the afterlife as your nuanced philosophical system gets reduced to a caricature or, worse, incorporated into competing philosophies you explicitly argued against. Your carefully developed concept of living according to nature might eventually be interpreted to mean something completely different from what you intended, with no way to issue posthumous corrections. The brutal truth is that philosophical glory in ancient Greece was rare, fleeting, and often accidental. For every Plato or Aristotle remembered through the ages, thousands of thoughtful philosophers were completely forgotten. Your brilliant insights, carefully constructed arguments, and profound wisdom would most likely disappear within a generation of your death, if they gained any recognition during your lifetime at all. The philosophical enterprise requires a peculiar combination of arrogance, believing your thoughts deserve preservation, and humility, recognizing they probably won't be. If you think being overlooked for professional recognition today is disappointing, imagine the cosmic injustice of developing ideas that might have transformed human thought, only to have them vanish into historical oblivion because you weren't as good at self-promotion as some guy who lived in a jar and masturbated in public. Sometimes, in ancient Greek philosophy as in life, the most outrageous voices drown out the most insightful ones, a frustrating reality that transcends the millennia. So you've managed to survive birth, childhood diseases, philosophical rivalries, political persecution, and hemlock accusations. Congratulations! You've reached old age in ancient Greece, which is approximately 50 to 60 years old. Yes, that's right. If you're reading this in your 40s, you'd already be considered elderly by ancient Greek standards. If you think having an existential crisis at 40 is bad in modern times, imagine reaching that age in ancient Greece and having people marvel at your impressive longevity. Wow, you're 45 and still breathing? You must have divine favor. Spoiler, this won't end well for your joints, which are already failing without the benefit of modern orthopedics or even basic pain management beyond wine and opium. Let's talk about those delightful age-related conditions you'd experience at the ripe old age of 50. Arthritis? No problem. Just offer sacrifices to Asclepius and rub some olive oil on it. Cataracts? Hope you like gradually going blind with no surgical options. Hearing loss? People will just assume you're deep in philosophical contemplation when you don't respond to their questions. Dental issues? Those few teeth you have left after a lifetime without dental care are probably loose, painful, and barely functional. If you think aging is challenging with modern medicine, imagine facing your body's decline with healthcare options limited to pray to healing gods and drink this mysterious herbal concoction that might help or might poison you. Your stoic philosophical training about accepting physical decline would get quite the workout. Medical theories about aging wouldn't provide much comfort. According to the humoral theory, aging was caused by the body becoming increasingly cold and dry. The prescribed treatments might include hot baths and consuming moist foods to counteract this drying process. If you think modern anti-aging creams make dubious claims, imagine following a regimen of specific foods, baths, and lifestyle practices based entirely on maintaining proper balance of 4 bodily fluids that don't actually govern health. Your desperate attempts to preserve your vigor by eating wet foods and avoiding drying activities would be touching if they weren't so completely ineffective. Your philosophical career might actually peak in old age, unlike many modern professions. Greeks respected elderly wisdom, and some of the most renowned philosophers did their most influential work in later years. Plato was writing until his death in his early 80s. However, this respect came with the expectation that you'd demonstrate the philosophical principles you'd spent a lifetime developing. If your theory centered on accepting mortality with dignity, you'd better not start wailing and gnashing your teeth when death approached. If you think it's stressful when people point out inconsistencies between your words and actions today, imagine the pressure of having your entire philosophical legacy judged by how gracefully you handle your deteriorating body and impending death. Speaking of death, let's discuss life expectancy. While some philosophers lived to their 70s or even 80s, Plato, Democritus, these were remarkable exceptions. Most people who survived childhood could expect to live to their 50s or 60s at best. Your philosophical reflections on mortality wouldn't be abstract considerations for some distant future, but practical preparations for an event you could reasonably expect within a decade or two. If you think midlife crises at 40 seem premature in the modern world, your ancient Greek midlife crisis would legitimately happen at 25, and by 50, you'd be well into borrowed time. Your bucket list would need to be remarkably concise given the limited time available to complete it. Retirement wasn't really a concept in ancient Greece. You'd continue teaching, writing, and philosophizing until you physically couldn't anymore. There were no pension plans, 401(k), S, or social security systems. Your financial security in old age depended entirely on personal wealth, family support, or the continued patronage of wealthy supporters interested in your philosophical insights. If you think saving for retirement is stressful today, imagine having no institutional support whatsoever for your non-productive years. Your philosophical school might become as much a necessity for survival as for intellectual legacy. Those students weren't just learning wisdom, they were your retirement plan. Physical appearance changes with aging would be particularly challenging without modern interventions. Gray hair could be covered with henna or other plant dyes, but wrinkles, sagging skin, and age spots were simply facts of life to be accepted. Ancient Greeks did value athletic fitness throughout life, but without modern exercise science, nutritional knowledge, or medical interventions, the physical decline would be swift and irreversible. If you think aging gracefully is challenging with all the resources of modern medicine and cosmetics, imagine facing your deterioration with nothing but olive oil moisturizer and philosophical resignation. Your dignified philosophical appearance with flowing white beard might look impressive in marble sculptures, but the reality of aging without modern hygiene or health care would be considerably less dignified. Mental decline posed a particular threat to philosophers whose entire identity and livelihood depended on cognitive function. Dementia, though not understood as we know it today, was recognized and feared. Cognitive changes were typically attributed to the general drying of the brain with age, according to humoral theory, rather than specific neurological conditions. If you think senior moments are frustrating now, imagine experiencing cognitive decline while trying to maintain your status as a wisdom figure whose primary value is intellectual insight. Your carefully constructed philosophical arguments might gradually become rambling and incoherent, undermining a lifetime of intellectual achievement without the consolation of medical explanation or treatment. Your social role would shift with age, particularly if you'd established yourself as a respected philosopher. You might become more of an honored figurehead than an active contributor to philosophical debates, expected to dispense wisdom rather than engage in vigorous dialectic. This transition could be either welcome, less pressure to innovate, or frustrating, less intellectual engagement, depending on your temperament. If you think being overlooked for innovative projects in favor of younger colleagues is irritating in modern workplaces, imagine being relegated to ceremonial philosophical status while watching younger thinkers take your ideas in directions you might not approve of, but lack the energy or influence to redirect. Family dynamics in old age could be complicated. If you had children, you might live with them and their families in a multi-generational household. Unmarried or childless philosophers might rely on students or friends for support. Unlike today's independent living options, assisted living facilities, or retirement communities, your choices would be limited to family care or potential destitution. If you think conversations about elder care are difficult in modern families, imagine being completely dependent on your adult children's willingness to house and feed you. with no alternatives if family relationships were strained. Your philosophical teachings about family duty might come back to haunt you if you hadn't been an attentive parent during your prime years pursuing wisdom. Physical pain would become a constant companion without effective pain management. Chronic conditions that are manageable today, arthritis, gout, osteoporosis, hernias, would cause significant suffering with minimal relief available. Philosophical schools developed various approaches to pain. Stoics advocated mental discipline to separate pain from suffering. Epicureans sought to minimize pain through moderate living. Cynics demonstrated indifference to physical discomfort. If you think it's challenging to maintain equanimity during a bad headache today, imagine summoning philosophical detachment while experiencing debilitating pain from conditions that will never improve but only worsen until death. Your theoretical positions on pain tolerance would face the ultimate practical test when chronic conditions turned everyday activities into exercises in endurance. Approaching death would become the final and perhaps most important philosophical act of your life. How you faced mortality would be seen as the ultimate testament to your philosophical principles. Socrates' calm acceptance of execution set a high standard for philosophical death. Students might gather around your deathbed to record your final insights and observe whether you lived your principles to the very end. If you think deathbed confessions or changes of heart are dramatic now, imagine the pressure of knowing your philosophical legacy might be completely undermined if you showed fear or doubt in your final moments. Your decades of teaching courage in the face of mortality would mean nothing if you couldn't demonstrate it when your time came. Finally, your philosophical legacy after death would depend entirely on your students' commitment to preserving and promoting your ideas. Without printing presses, digital archives, or even standardized citation practices, your wisdom would survive only if others found it valuable enough to manually copy and teach to the next generation. Many brilliant philosophical minds have been lost to history because their students failed to effectively transmit their ideas. If you think it's frustrating when your work doesn't get proper credit or recognition today, imagine your entire life's intellectual contribution disappearing within a generation because your students got distracted by some new philosophical trend or simply didn't care enough to accurately preserve your nuanced arguments. The final cruel irony of philosophical old age in ancient Greece is that after dedicating your life to developing wisdom, its survival beyond your death remained entirely out of your control, perhaps the ultimate lesson in philosophical detachment from outcomes. Welcome to the final chapter of your Greek philosophical journey, where we examine what remains of all that uncomfortable living, dangerous thinking, and hemlock-adjacent argumentation. Let's start with how we remember ancient Greek philosophers today. As marble busts of serious-looking bearded men, their faces frozen in expressions of perpetual constipation. I mean, deep thought. These pristine white sculptures give the impression of pure, lofty intellects floating above mundane concerns. Spoiler: this won't end well for historical accuracy. Those sculptures were originally painted in vibrant, sometimes garish colors, and the real philosophers were sweaty, imperfect humans with body odor and digestive issues just like the rest of us. If you think Instagram filters create unrealistic images, the marble whitewashing of philosophical history has been creating unrealistic standards for 2,000 years. Modern academia has developed a peculiar relationship with ancient Greek philosophy, simultaneously revering it as the foundation of Western thought, while frequently misinterpreting or oversimplifying complex ideas. Plato's theory of forms gets reduced to a vague notion about perfect versions of things. Aristotle's nuanced ethics becomes moderation in all things. Stoicism is flattened to suppressing emotions, and Epicureanism is misunderstood as hedonistic pleasure-seeking. If you think it's annoying when someone misrepresents your carefully considered opinion today, imagine your sophisticated philosophical system being distorted into an inspirational coffee mug, quote, 2,400 years after your death. Your subtle distinctions and carefully constructed arguments would be compressed into fortune cookie wisdom for philosophy undergraduates to misquote in their freshman essays. Hollywood hasn't helped with accurate representations. Films like 300 present ancient Greeks as chiseled fitness models with perfect abs and British accents. engaging in slow-motion combat, while occasionally spouting philosophical one-liners. The reality of short, olive-skinned Mediterranean people with varying levels of fitness and dental problems doesn't sell movie tickets. If you think modern media creates unrealistic body standards, imagine being an actual Greek philosopher watching Gerard Butler perform as a Spartan while knowing the real historical figures probably had intestinal parasites and lice. Your philosophical tradition that emphasized inner virtue over physical appearance has been ironically transformed into six-pack abs and perfect hair for cinematic consumption. Contemporary pop philosophy often cherry-picks ancient Greek concepts to create marketable self-help approaches. Modern Stoicism focuses heavily on personal resilience, while conveniently downplaying the original emphasis on virtue ethics. Socratic questioning becomes a corporate workshop technique stripped of its radical skepticism about conventional wisdom. If you think it's frustrating when your nuanced political position gets reduced to left or right, imagine your comprehensive philosophical system being transformed into a 5-step productivity hack for busy executives. Your careful reasoning about the nature of virtue and the good life becomes 5 Stoic mindfulness techniques to crush your quarterly goals, in a LinkedIn article written by someone who's never read Epictetus in the original Greek. Academic philosophy departments maintain complicated relationships with their ancient Greek predecessors. They're simultaneously the foundation of the Western philosophical tradition and increasingly critiqued for their limitations, particularly their exclusion of women, slaves, and non-Greeks from philosophical consideration. If you think academic politics are complicated now, imagine the awkwardness of building your entire discipline on thinkers whose socio-political views would be completely unacceptable in modern contexts. Your profound insights about human nature might be forever tainted by your casual acceptance of slavery or belief in women's intellectual inferiority, creating eternal footnotes to your philosophical legacy that no amount of contextualizing can fully resolve. The physical settings of philosophical schools have been transformed into tourist attractions. The Athenian Agora, once filled with vigorous debate and intellectual exchange, is now populated by sunburned tourists taking selfies with ancient ruins. Plato's Academy exists as an archaeological site rather than a living institution. If you think it's strange seeing your childhood home turned into something else, imagine your dedicated philosophical workspace becoming an Instagram backdrop for visitors who know your name but have never engaged with your ideas. Your teaching garden, where you carefully cultivated both plants and minds, now features guided tours in multiple languages and a gift shop selling plastic miniatures of your head. The survival of philosophical texts has been wildly uneven and somewhat arbitrary. We have most of Plato's works, but only fragments of Heraclitus. Aristotle's polished, public writings were lost, while his lecture notes survived. Many women philosophers like Aspasia and Hipparchia are known only through mentions in men's writings. If you think it's unfair when less qualified colleagues get more recognition, imagine the cosmic injustice of philosophical legacy being determined not by the quality of your ideas, but by accidents of manuscript preservation. Your brilliant ethical treatise might have been lost forever because it was stored in the wrong part of a library that caught fire, while your rival's mediocre political writings survived because they were copied by a particularly enthusiastic student with access to durable papyrus. Translation issues create additional layers of distortion. Ancient Greek concepts often lack precise English equivalents. Eudaimonia isn't exactly happiness, logos isn't simply reason, and errate is more complex than virtue. Each translation makes interpretive choices that subtly shift meaning. If you think it's annoying when someone paraphrases you inaccurately, imagine your precise philosophical terminology being squeezed into inadequate linguistic containers in languages that won't exist for millennia. Your carefully selected Greek terms with specific philosophical implications become approximations at best, outright misrepresentations at worst, creating endless academic debates about what you really meant that you can never clarify. Modern philosophers engage with ancient Greek thought in ways that would be unrecognizable to the original thinkers. Analytical philosophers extract arguments from their historical and cultural context to evaluate logical structure. Continental philosophers incorporate ancient concepts into theoretical frameworks the Greeks could never have imagined. If you think it's strange when your parents try to use current slang, imagine Plato confronting Derrida's deconstructionist reading of the Phaedrus, or Aristotle trying to make sense of symbolic logic notation applied to his syllogisms. Your philosophical children have evolved in directions you couldn't possibly have anticipated, creating intellectual family resemblances you might struggle to recognize. Popular understanding of ancient Greek philosophy often focuses disproportionately on biographical details rather than philosophical content. Diogenes living in a jar, Socrates' ugly appearance, or Pythagoras' strange food restrictions receive more attention than their actual ideas. If you think it's irritating when people focus on celebrity gossip rather than substantive news, imagine your carefully developed metaphysical system being overshadowed for eternity by anecdotes about your eccentric personal habits. Your profound insights into the nature of reality might be forever secondary to the story about that time you publicly insulted Alexander the Great or refused to wear shoes as a matter of principle. Philosophy itself has changed dramatically since ancient Greek times. What counted as natural philosophy has splintered into specialized scientific disciplines. Philosophical questions considered answerable through reason alone are now addressed through empirical research. Areas like formal logic have developed technical sophistication far beyond what ancient philosophers could have imagined. If you think it's difficult keeping up with technological changes within your lifetime, imagine the intellectual vertigo of seeing your comprehensive approach to wisdom-seeking fragmented into specialized disciplines with methodologies you couldn't comprehend. Your unified philosophical approach to understanding the cosmos has been dissected into academic departments that rarely communicate with each other. The ultimate irony is that while ancient Greek philosophers sought practical wisdom for living well, their ideas are now often treated as abstract intellectual exercises divorced from everyday application. Plato's reflection on justice becomes a textual analysis problem rather than a guide for creating a just society. Aristotle's virtue ethics becomes a theoretical position to contrast with consequentialism rather than a practical approach to character development. If you think it's frustrating when your practical suggestions get lost in theoretical discussions, imagine your passionate commitment to philosophy as a lived practice being transformed into academic exercises for students who see your ideas as just another topic to master for exams. In the end, perhaps the greatest legacy of ancient Greek philosophy is its enduring questions rather than its specific answers. The tensions between individual and society, between reason and emotion, between fate and free will. These fundamental human concerns transcend historical periods and cultural contexts. If there's comfort to be found in philosophical immortality, perhaps it's that while your specific conclusions might be challenged, revised, or forgotten, the questions you struggled with continue to engage human minds across millennia. Your particular answers may not have survived intact, but your fundamental questions about what it means to live a good human life remain as vital today as when you first posed them under the Mediterranean sun, sweating in your chiton, fighting off mosquitoes, and hoping that suspicious stomach pain wasn't the start of something serious. In philosophy, as in life, it's not the destination but the journey, and what a journey it's been. Now pass the hemlock, or better yet, pour another glass of wine. Some philosophical traditions are worth preserving.